A story that often cheers my heart especially when I'm on an airplane, but I think it has overtones that can apply to just about, quite a few situations. There was a young girl about 10 years old. She was on a plane. She was sitting by herself. No parents around. And as the plane took off and was going through the sky, all of a sudden it became quite turbulent. And the little girl just sat there very quietly, very contentedly, reading or had her eyes closed, but was not excited at all. And a gentleman noticed this little 10-year-old girl. And throughout the course of the flight, when it would become turbulent, this man noticed that this little girl just was completely unperturbed, just completely at peace and no problem whatsoever. Well, the man decided, he said, when I get off this plane, I'm going to make sure to meet with that little girl because I want to find out why, when it was turbulent and upset, that she was completely content and at peace. So the plane landed. The man hurried to the front so he'd be sure to see this little 10-year-old girl. Well, they met at the door, and as they were walking off going up to go into the terminal, the man said, "Young lady, I noticed that throughout the flight, especially when it was turbulent, that you were perfectly content." He said, "I want to know why." Well, she looked at him and she said, "Sir, it's rather quite simple and quite easy. My daddy is the pilot, and he promised me he was taking me home." As Pastor Al prayed, yes, up ahead there are some turbulent times, quite turbulent. But our daddy is still the pilot. And our daddy is taking us home. So, we're going to look this afternoon at the Golden Rule. I did about a 5 or 6 part series on our YouTube channel. This was basically a summation of those 5 or 6 parts that I did. And this basically hits the high points. We all know the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Others do not see it quite like that. They say the Golden Rule, the Golden Rule is the one who has the gold makes the rules. It sounds ruthless, and the people we're looking at today are ruthless. In fact, these people have been working at this for hundreds of years. And what I'm talking about, of course, is a central bank in the United States. Because with a central bank, the one who has the gold makes the rules. Amschel Rothschild, back in the 18th century, right around the mid-1700s, he was quoted as saying, "Just give me the control of a nation's money system, and I don't care who writes the laws." Because with the money, Amschel recognized that he could buy off any man, and he could demand from them, through the use of money, he could demand they do it the way he said. Even the famous senator in the 19th century by the name of Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster, while he was a great orator and in many ways stood for right, eventually he sold out to the money people of the United States, Nicholas Biddle and the central banking system. And Daniel Webster did exactly as he was told. So Amschel Rothschild's formula worked. Give me control of a nation's money system, And I don't care who writes the laws. The book of Revelation makes it clear that money will be used at the end of time to strangle the world. Economic sanctions will be used to coerce worship in the near future. Yeah, we can all see it coming. Revelation chapter 13, 2,000 years ago, John the Revelator, in Revelation 13, verses 15 to 17, he wrote these words. And he, and it's referring to the first beast, the United States of America, had power to give life to the image of the beast. And the image of the beast, of course, is when apostate Protestant churches use the government to enforce their religion. It's that simple. That the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship, and of course worship is involved in the commandments of God, that's true worship. False worship is honoring man-made traditions. So the great final issue in Revelation 13 and 14, not because the great controversy says so, but because the great controversy is telling us what the Bible said so. So the great final issue is over the commandments of God and the traditions of men, and the word worship tells us that. So anybody that does not go along, they will use death. And he, the United States, will cause all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark, which we know is Sunday rebellion, in their right hand or in their foreheads. And now here's the kicker in Revelation 13 and verse 17 that shows that one of the mechanisms that will be used to coerce worship will be money. The Bible says that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And it's fascinating to me, folk, in the series that we did on the Golden Rule, that while today, through the use of computer, of course, the ability to control the economic system of America and the world is far greater than it was back 150 to 200 years ago. Nevertheless, the mechanisms for control in the United States were already in place before Ellen White was born. Because Ellen White was born in 1827. And prior to that, there had already been 3 experiments in the United States where a central bank was implemented and used. So 3 times before Ellen White was even born, the mechanism for economic control was already in place at that time. Now here's the ruthless, gutless Amschel Rothschild. He was the founder of the money power of the Rothschilds. And from some books that I've read, the Rothschilds today, along with those whom they have supported with wealth, namely the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Chases, folk, these people control 85 to 90% of the wealth of this planet. And so what are they going to do? You know, we sit back and we say, well, you know, why are these insane things going on? Well, it's real simple. Because the people with money, they're causing the things to happen. It's just that simple. And God is allowing it because God wants to come. He wants this great controversy experiment to be over once and for all. Amen. So Mayor Amschel Rothschild made an interesting comment. He said, "Give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws." Rothschild understood that money was the ultimate source of power in this world. And if he could control a nation's money flow, he could eventually destroy all the laws of that nation. And that's what they've done. That's what they've done. It's real simple. Real simple. Now, the kicker, because you look in Revelation chapter 13 and you say, well, Revelation 13 is talking about the United States coupled with the first beast of Revelation 13, which is the papacy, plus the setting up of a look-alike religious power in the United States, apostate Protestantism. And you say, but the Rothschilds, they're Jews. So how do the Rothschilds fit in to the scenario in Revelation 13? Well, glad you asked. Notice the statement, rulers of evil, F. Tupper Saucy, pages 160 and 161. It says, aware that the Rothschilds are an important Jewish family. I looked them up in the Encyclopedia Judaica and discovered they bear the title Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. Well, there's the connection, Ed. The Jewish Rothschilds, the wealthiest family on this planet, who along with their cronies control 85 to 90% of the world's wealth. They're in cahoots with Rome. They're in cahoots with Rome. Not a surprise, is it? Not a surprise at all. Now, see, a lot of people, Evan Sadler, the nice guy, but Evan, promotes the fact that the Jews rule the world. And then there was a dear gentleman years ago who lost his job because he refused to go along with questions on doctrine. Elder David Bauer. Both of them got sidetracked on the Jews ruling the world. So a lot of people, because of the Rothschild wealth, because they're Jewish, they say, see, the Rothschilds are Jews and they have all this power. But they failed to recognize the fact that the Rothschilds are subservient to the Vatican. And the only way, friends, that Revelation 13 and Revelation 17 on Babylon the Great, the only way that those make any sense at all is that this powerfully wealthy Jewish family is somehow tied and is subservient to the Vatican. It's the only way it makes sense. Otherwise, those who say the Jews rule the world, they'd be right. In fact, we've all probably heard of the famous Seventh-day Adventist doctor, a woman who got cancer and then healed herself of cancer. You remember the story? Lorraine Day. That's right, Corla. Lorraine Day. Well, I was at Danny Vieira's camp meeting, his health crusade. Oh, this was probably, Danny's been gone 4 years now, 5 years. So maybe 7, 8 years ago now, I went to Danny's health and healing crusade, and he asked me to go on the platform for one of the meetings and have prayer. I said, of course, love to. So we go around in the back room, ready to go out onto the platform, kind of like what Al's got over here. Pastor Al, you got that little spot. Danny had one of those too. So we're in the back, and Lorraine Day is going to be the main speaker at the Health Crusade for that meeting. And so Danny and I walk in, and Danny says, hey, Lorraine, come on over here. So Lorraine Day walks over, and Danny says, I want you to meet somebody. And he said, this is Bill Hughes. And Lorraine Day got this quizzical look on her face. And Danny said, yeah, this is the same guy that wrote the book, The Secret Terrorists and The Enemy Unmasked. And then the light went on in Lorraine Day's mind. You could just see it. And she said, you know, I read your book. She said, it's too bad that you're wrong. And I think I said to Lorraine Day, I said, I find it sad that you think it's wrong. She said, oh, no, you're mistaken. It's not Rome that's behind everything. It's the Jews. Well, then I asked the question that ended the conversation. I said, well, Dr. Day, if what you're saying is true, then who is Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, in Revelation 17? Well, at that point, Danny realized that two bulls were locking horns and the conversation wasn't going to end. So, Danny said, it's time to go on the rostrum, let's go. But, so a number of Seventh-day Adventists have gotten hoodwinked because they have not seen the tie between the Rothschilds and their Jewish background with the papacy. The appointment of Rothschild gave the black papacy. Now again, sometimes people get confused on that, but it's not. This is not a racial comment. This is simply a statement that the Jesuit order are behind the scenes. They're in the dark. Nobody sees them. Very few people know who the Jesuit general is today. But Pope Francis, he's the white papacy. He's out in front. Everybody sees him. Everybody knows who he is. So when Saucy refers to the black papacy, he's referencing the Jesuit order. Okay, the appointment of Rothschild gave the black papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? See, folk, for centuries, the papacy slaughtered the Jewish race. For centuries. And of course, it was the papacy and the Jesuits who were behind Adolf Hitler and the slaughter of the Jews during World War II. Facts of history. Well, let's see how far back the Rothschilds and the Jesuit Papal Consortium, how far back they've been playing with American wealth. Notice these quotes. Biographer Frederick Morton concluded that through the effective use of money, the Rothschilds had successfully conquered the world more thoroughly, more cunningly, and much more lastingly than all the Caesars before or all the Hitlers after them. Gustavus Meyer, History of the Great American Fortunes. Under the surface, the Rothschilds long had a powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. The law records show that they were the power in the old Bank of the United States. Do you know when the old Bank of the United States was established? It was established in 1775. That was before the Declaration of Independence. What's that? They didn't call it, Roy, a central bank. And it gets confusing as I've done the research. They called the original attempt at a central bank, they call it this, the old Bank of the United States. But and that was again in 1775. But the first time they actually call it the Central or Federal Reserve Bank, it's during the time of Alexander Hamilton, which was in the early 1790s. So, but you can see, folk, the Rothschilds, the papacy, the Jesuits were going after the financial fabric of America before the Declaration of Independence. Now here's another statement, Derek Wilson, The Wealth and Power of a Dynasty. Over the years since Nathan Rothschild, the Manchester textile manufacturer, had bought cotton from the southern states, Rothschilds had developed heavy American commitments. Nathan had made loans to various states of the Union, had been for a time the official European banker for U.S. government, and was a pledged supporter of the Bank of the United States. Again, 1775. Now, folks, think about it. Europe has been controlled for 1,000 years by the papacy. They've controlled and spread their tentacles through Africa, through the Far East, all over the then known world, South America. So here is this nation rising up in a wilderness, and people are talking about freedom. They're talking about opposing the inroads of the Vatican. So what are you going to do if you're a Jesuit, hell-bent on ruling the world? How are you going to go after America's jugular vein? How are you going to do it? You're going to do it through money. You're going to gain control of that, and then you're going to force these liberty-loving Americans to do what you want them to do. Well, that's exactly what they did. It's exactly what they did. Robert Morris, 1781, establishes, it wasn't 1775, it was 1781. Established the old Bank of the United States, and it was established just like the Bank of England that the Rothschilds ran. Just like it, friends. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton, the ping pong ball man, established another bank, but this one was called the Central Bank of the United States, just like the Bank of England, just like the Rothschild Bank of England. Nicholas Biddle in 1816, notice the date, 4 years after the War of 1812. Biddle buddies with the Rothschilds, sets up a central bank in the United States. And finally, 1910, Jekyll Island. And that Federal Reserve Bank that was started, it was passed into law in 1913, remains today. And guess who controls it? In every case, folk, Morris, Hamilton, Biddle, and those at Jekyll Island, J.P. Morgan, Paul Warburg, the Rockefellers, they were all doing the bidding of the Rothschilds and ultimately the papacy. So here you see this trend in American history. Now, let's take a look. Why did I say, notice the date? What happened in 1816 that's of interest to Seventh-day Adventists? What happened in 1816? Does anybody know? William Miller, Don. William Miller started studying the Bible in 1816. 2 years later, he was convinced that Jesus was going to return 25 years later. Ellen White is not yet alive in 1816. She would come 11 years later. They tell the story of Nathan Rothschild, who was behind this banking system from the very get-go. And then, of course, his ancestors down at Jekyll Island, the Morgans, the Rockefellers, the Warburgs, etc. But they tell the story in 1815 that there was a famous battle that was fought in Europe. It was called the Battle at Waterloo. And the battle at Waterloo was between the Napoleonic forces of France and the powers of England. And so they engaged in battle. Nathan Rothschild was financing both sides of the war between England and France. And so during the battle, Nathan Rothschild positioned one of his agents amongst the English army and one agent amongst the French army. So as they're fighting, both of those agents on both sides, well, they can see who's going to win the war, the battle. So one of these agents hurries to the English Channel on the French side, and there Nathan Rothschild is waiting. Because Nathan Rothschild knew that whoever won that battle was going to control Europe. So the agent says, the English are going to win. Nathan Rothschild gets the news, takes a ferry across the English Channel, heads straight to the London Stock Exchange that morning. And as the day begins, Nathan Rothschild begins to tell his agents all around in that room, by signals, sell all your stock. Sell it. Just sell it as fast as you can. Get as much money out of it as you can. Well, everybody at the London Stock Exchange, they're watching Nathan Rothschild agents selling all their commodities. And these people are going, Rothschild knows the English lost. They lost the battle. France won. Well, if France won that battle, the English economy was going to dump. It was going to be destroyed. So all these buyers and sellers in the London Stock Exchange that morning, they say, oh no, we better sell too. So they're selling everything for whatever they can get. 5 cents on a dollar, a penny on a dollar, just to get something out of their investment. That went on for an hour or two. Then Nathan Rothschild gave another signal to his agents around the London Stock Exchange. And he said, now you go around and you buy up everything. Nathan Rothschild gained control of England and Europe that day. That's how ruthless the man was, folks. He was a cutthroat. I read in one book where it said that the Rothschild family is taught that men are machines. That's what men are. And women are toys. That's the Rothschild mindset, folk. That's sick. Just sick. But that's the way it is. Alexander Hamilton, the man that's on our $10 bills. The reason I called him the ping pong ball man was because Alexander Hamilton had a tendency to go back and forth. Sometimes he and Thomas Jefferson would agree on sound financial principles where gold would back the money. And then Alexander Hamilton would flip and he would say, oh no, we ought to just have paper money, fiat money they call it. So Alexander Hamilton would go back and forth. Well, finally, in 1790, Hamilton submitted a proposal to Congress for a central bank. Hamilton had been an aide of Robert Morris, the man who started the first bank in 1781. Surprisingly, during the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Hamilton had been a strong supporter of sound money. And again, when they talk about sound money, that is money that is backed by gold. See, How much value does this have? It's paper and ink. How much do you think it costs to print this? A couple of cents maybe. This is valuable only as you and I say it is. And the people we take it to buy something, they say, oh, that has a lot of value. That's the only thing that makes this valuable, folks. Otherwise, this is absolutely worthless. This is as... How much worth does this have? What will you do with this bulletin tonight when we're all done with these meetings? File 13. That's right. How is this any different from this? It's only because we say this has value. That gives it value. But what happens if someday, like they did in Germany pre-World War II, when people start bringing into Berlin wheelbarrows full of money, and the government says, oh, well, those don't have money, those don't have value anymore. So what happens then? Goes in file 13. It's worthless. The only thing that gives money value is what people say. And the only thing that makes money something that maintains its strength, if it's backed by something that really is valuable, gold or silver. Those have intrinsic value. So Hamilton was a strong supporter of money where gold was the backup. But Hamilton completely shifted within 3 years and proposed a central bank which could generate money as the Federal Reserve Bank does today. Doesn't it? The government of the United States wants $1 billion. Well, what did they do? Hey, George. Yeah, you're down at the Federal Reserve, you're down at the Office of Engraving and Printing. I need $1 billion. They send him $1 billion. May cost a couple of $1,000s for the print, for the paper. That's exactly what they did back then. Shows that Alexander Hamilton was compromised by the Jesuits. This is hard to reconcile. One must suspect that even the most well-intentioned of men can become corrupted by the temptations of wealth and power. That's what happened. G. Edward Griffin's conclusion for Alexander Hamilton to have shifted so drastically within a few short years would lead us to believe that he had been bribed or blackmailed by the secret investors. Either that or joined them. In 1816, the Third Bank of the United States was established in order to bring stability to the national economy, serve as a depository for national funds, and provide the government with the means of floating loans and transferring money across the country. In reality, the central bank was set up to help the Rothschilds' papacy control the money, the economy, and the government of the United States. And it was at this time that William Miller started studying the Bible. It's fascinating to me, folk, that if you go back and you research the history of the central bank of the United States, every time somebody opposed it, there was either assassination or there was war. Because you see, whenever they would establish a central bank, they would do it on a 20-year charter. So when Alexander Hamilton set up the central bank in 1791, they had a 20-year charter. That meant that it would expire in 1811. Well, in 1810, the Congress of the United States They had not been completely bought yet. So they said, no more central bank. This is horrible. We're going to get rid of this right now. So they did. They abolished the central bank in 1810. 1811, central bank expires. There's no more central bank in America. Nathan Rothschild is furious. Rome is incensed. So what happened a year after 1811? The War of 1812. And if you go back and you read history books, the history books will tell you that neither side won the War of 1812. Oh, but somebody did win the War of 1812. It wasn't the United States and it wasn't England. But you know who won? The war ended in 1814. Okay? 2 years after the war ended, another central bank was established in the United States. So Rome won the War of 1812. 1816, here we go. Biddle had one powerful advantage over his adversary, who was Andrew Jackson. For all practical purposes, Congress was in his pocket. Or more accurately, the product of his generosity was in the pockets of congressmen. Following the Rothschild formula, Biddle had been careful to reward compliant politicians with success. In business, in the business world, few of them would bite the hand that fed them. Even the great Senator Daniel Webster found himself kneeling at Biddle's throne. Consequences for refusal. As we said, the charter to reestablish the central bank that was to expire in 1811 never happened. The War of 1812 was fought to reestablish it, and it did. In the 1830s, Andrew Jackson went head-to-head with Nicholas Biddle, put his re-election campaign, almost was not re-elected, but he came through it all right. And in 1835, 3 years after his re-election, there was a man by the name of Richard Lawrence that tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson. Why? Because Jackson opposed a central bank. Abraham Lincoln opposed the central banking. He was assassinated. The Titanic, many people that died on the Titanic were opposed to the central bank that was about to be established a year and 8 months after the Titanic sinking. Lewis T. McFadden, John F. Kennedy, both were killed because they both opposed the central bank. Lewis T. McFadden was a congressman and was on the Financial Committee of Congress. He said that the central bank was, as it were, a snake trying to destroy America. And of course, John F. Kennedy tried to set up a silver standard as the backing for our currency, but it never was allowed to happen because he was killed in 1963. Abraham Lincoln understood clearly the situation in the United States. Lincoln foretold this before he died. He said the division of the United States in federations of equal force was decided long before the Civil War by the high financial powers of Europe. See, folk, slavery, that was an excuse. That was an excuse. The issue for the Civil War, it was, we've got to split America in half. The division of the U.S. in federations of equal force was decided before the Civil War by the high financial powers of Europe, the Rothschilds, the Vatican. These bankers were afraid that the United States, if they remained in one bloc as one nation, would attain economic and financial independence, which would upset their financial domination over Europe and the world. Of course, in the inner circle of finance, the voice of the Rothschilds prevailed. They saw an opportunity for prodigious booty if they could substitute two feeble democracies burdened with debt to the financiers, in place of a vigorous republic sufficient unto herself. Therefore, they sent their emissaries into the field to exploit the question of slavery. One of the people that the Rothschilds used to exploit the issue of slavery was John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. To drive a wedge between the two parts of the Union. The rupture between the North and the South became inevitable. The masters of European finance employed all their forces to bring about and to turn it to their advantage. So that's what it was all about, friends. It was about dividing and splitting America in pieces. That was the goal. That's Morgan Robertson. Just a few notes about the Titanic. In 1898, 14 years before the Titanic sailed, a man named Morgan Robertson penned a book called The Wreck of the Titan. It's about a luxury liner that was deemed unsinkable, that was going too fast in the North Atlantic waters in April. It hit an iceberg, killing almost everyone on board due to the lack of lifeboats. So this guy writes this book 14 years before the Titanic sinks. The size of the ship, he called it the Titan. It's about the exact same size of the Titanic. They had a lack of lifeboats. It was sailing in the North Atlantic. It was both events happened in April, and most of the people died because of a lack of lifeboats. Well, many people died. 14 years later, this fictional book would play out in real life exactly down to the name with the wreck of the Titanic, but this time it would have major political implications. Some of the wealthiest men in the world were on that ship, and some were opposed to the Federal Reserve and the central bank. Facts: J.P. Morgan funded and built the Titanic. J.P. Morgan worked for the Rothschilds and ultimately for the Vatican. J.P. Morgan was booked on the voyage but canceled at the last moment. Friends of J.P. Morgan, Milton Hershey, also canceled at the last moment and survived to build the Hershey food empire. Fact: Jesuit priest by the name of Francis Brown was on the Titanic. Before it sailed, he was told to get off, which he did. Another fact: Edward Smith worked for J.P. Morgan for 26 years. He was told 8 times that there were icebergs in the area, that he was to slow down the ship, but instead he went full speed ahead, and the Titanic was history. Like the Titanic, the fictional ship was wrecked on an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic Ocean. There were not enough lifeboats. The Titan would have survived a head-on collision with the iceberg, but a glancing encounter did more extensive damage. There are also similarities in the size, the speed, the lifeboats, the life-saving equipment. After the Titanic sinking, some people credited Robertson with precognition and clairvoyance, which he denied. Scholars attribute the similarities to Robertson's extensive knowledge of shipbuilding and maritime trends. And I would take the position that Morgan Robertson got together with some of his friends from Rome, and they said, we want you to write a book, and we want you to tell it just the way we're planning it to happen. And that's exactly what happened. Why a central bank? Why do we have a central bank today, known as the Federal Reserve? Folk, there's nothing federal about the central bank in the United States. It's private, it's a name, and it's a name only. Paul Warburg, an associate of the Rothschilds, said we've got to call it federal because if we do, that will make Americans think that it's an American institution. And it's not at all, folks. It's owned and controlled by the Rothschilds and ultimately by the papacy. Now let's see how it works. Okay, the United States wants to borrow $1 billion. The government issues a bond for that amount, much as a water company does when it wants to raise money for a new pipeline or a new dam. The government delivers the bond for the $1 billion to the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank takes the bond and writes an order to the Department of Printing and Engraving to print the billions of dollars worth of bills. After about 2 weeks or so, when the bills are printed, the Department of Printing and Engraving ships the bills to the Federal Reserve, which then writes a check for about $2,000 to pay for printing the $1 billion worth of bills. The Federal Reserve Bank then takes the $1 billion and lends it to the United States government. And the people of the country pay interest at an exorbitant rate each year on this money, which came out of nothing. Folk, we are the guinea pigs in how the Federal Reserve Bank works. We are completely being ripped off, completely. It's the greatest fiasco. It's such a fiasco. Because, folk, you got $1 billion, and every month you start adding on interest. And so you end up paying billions and billions of dollars. We see, therefore, that when the United States government goes into debt, $1 plus the interest goes into the pockets of the owners of the Federal Reserve Bank. This is the largest, most colossal theft ever perpetrated in the history of mankind. And it's so slick, so subtle, and so devilish. It's obfuscated by propaganda from the news media that the victims are not even aware of what is happening. You can see why Rome wants to keep this operation secret. The Constitution of the United States gives to Congress the power to coin money. If Congress coined its own money as the Constitution directs, it would not have to pay the hundreds of billions of dollars of interest that it now pays each year to the bankers for the national debt. See, folk, prior to the 1960s, America was in great shape. It was only when Lyndon Johnson started fighting 2 wars, the war in Vietnam and the war on poverty in America, the United States government over time became the greatest debtor nation on this planet. And so today we owe, $35 trillion to the central bank. Why? It's because of the interest we are paying on money that came out of nothing. And you know what, folks? If you study, if you research this, you'll find that every nation on the face of the earth has a central bank. Every country does. And so the Bible says, he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. That the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And so now today, we hear about digital currency, don't we? That was supposed to be established in July of this year. It was. Okay. All of the draconian things that could happen with digital currency, we're not seeing them yet. Okay. So we can see Revelation 13 coming to fruition right before our eyes. And at the same time, folk, and I'll close with this, I can't help but get back, because heaven has a response to the powers that be of Revelation 13, and that's Revelation 18 and verse 1. That after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. So, praise God, folks. Praise God. The devil has his plan, and the Lord does too.